She said, "You're too soft. Real men don't complain," when I opened up about my anxiety. I didn't argue. I just shut down. When she finally needed my support, I wasn't there. I, 32M, never thought vulnerability would be my downfall. For 3 years, I'd bottled up everything. Work stress, family issues, the constant pressure to be the provider, the protector, the one who never breaks. My anxiety had been building like water behind a dam, and I finally cracked. It happened on a Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten home from another brutal day at the marketing firm where I worked 60-hour weeks. The panic attacks had started a month earlier. Chest tightness, racing heart, the feeling that I was drowning in air. I'd been hiding them, popping antacids thinking it was heartburn, making excuses to step outside during meetings. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while dinner heated in the microwave. I stood there for a moment, watching her, gathering courage I didn't know I possessed. 3 years of marriage, and I'd never really opened up about anything deeper than weekend plans or whose turn it was to take out the trash. I told her I needed to talk about something important. She didn't look up from her screen, just made a non-committal sound. I sat down across from her and explained about the panic attacks, how work was crushing me, how I'd been waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, how I felt like I was failing at everything. She finally looked up, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Disappointment mixed with disgust. She asked if I was seriously complaining right now. I tried to explain that I wasn't complaining, just sharing what I was going through, hoping for some support. That's when she said it. The words that would replay in my head for months. I was too soft, and real men don't complain about anxiety. She said she needed a partner who could handle life's pressures, not someone who fell apart over work stress. She told me I was being dramatic and needed to man up. I felt something die inside me in that moment. Not just hurt, death. The part of me that had trusted her with my deepest fears simply stopped existing. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded and went to bed. From that night forward, I shut down completely. Not just emotionally, strategically. I realized I'd been married to someone who saw vulnerability as weakness, and weakness as something to be scorned. If she wanted a man who never complained, never showed emotion, never needed support, then that's exactly what she'd get. I became a ghost in my own home. Polite, functional, completely detached. When she asked about my day, I gave one-word answers. When she wanted to discuss weekend plans, I said whatever she preferred was fine. When she tried to initiate intimacy, I was present but absent, going through motions without connection. She noticed the change, but seemed satisfied with it initially. I was no longer burdening her with my problems. I handled everything myself: bills, household repairs, social obligations, with mechanical efficiency. If this was what she wanted in a partner, she was getting the premium version. The irony was that my anxiety actually decreased. Once I stopped expecting emotional support from her, I found other outlets. I started going to a therapist without telling her, paid for sessions with money from a separate account I'd opened. I began exercising obsessively, channeling stress into something productive. I developed friendships with coworkers, people who actually listened when I spoke. Months passed like this. We coexisted in the same space, sharing meals and a bed, but living completely separate emotional lives. She seemed content with the arrangement. I was the low-maintenance husband who never made demands, never complained, never needed anything from her. Then her father had a stroke. She was close to her dad, closer than she'd ever been to me, I realized. He was in the ICU for a week, and she was falling apart. I watched her transform from the confident woman who'd dismissed my anxiety into someone fragile and desperate for support. She started trying to talk to me about her fears, about how scared she was of losing him. She wanted me to hold her while she cried, to reassure her that everything would be okay, to be the emotional anchor she'd never allowed me to be. But I wasn't there anymore. Not in the way she needed. When she reached for me, I didn't pull away, but I didn't pull her closer either. When she cried, I offered tissues but no comfort. When she asked if I thought her father would recover, I said I didn't know, which was honest but cold. She started getting frustrated with my responses, asking why I was being so distant when she needed me most. I told her I was just being practical, that emotions wouldn't change the medical situation. She said she needed emotional support, not practical advice. That's when I reminded her of what she'd told me about emotional needs. I repeated her exact words back to her, about being too soft, about real people not complaining, about handling life's pressures without falling apart. I asked if she was being dramatic and suggested she should toughen up. The look on her face was devastating. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, which wasn't far from the truth. I'd become exactly what she'd asked for, a man who didn't engage with emotional complexity, who didn't offer comfort, who didn't complain but also didn't connect. Her father recovered, thankfully, but something between us had broken beyond repair. She tried to repair the damage, saying she hadn't meant what she'd said about my anxiety, that she'd been stressed about other things and taken it out on me. She said she wanted us to work on our communication, maybe try couples therapy, but I wasn't interested in fixing anything. I'd learned something valuable during those months of emotional isolation. I didn't need her support to survive, and I definitely didn't need her judgment. The man she'd married was gone, replaced by someone who'd internalized her lesson about self-reliance. Update 1. The conversation about couples therapy was revealing. She kept saying she wanted to fix things, that she realized she'd been wrong to dismiss my anxiety. But her apologies felt hollow because they only came after she'd experienced her own vulnerability and found me lacking as a support system. I told her I wasn't interested in therapy because I was no longer the person who needed fixing. I'd fixed myself by accepting her perspective completely. I'd become emotionally self-sufficient and stopped expecting things from her that she clearly wasn't capable of providing. She got angry then, saying I was punishing her for one comment she'd made during a stressful time. I corrected her. It wasn't punishment, it was adaptation. She'd taught me that emotional neediness was unattractive and weakness was contemptible. I'd simply learned the lesson she'd wanted to teach. We started sleeping in separate bedrooms around this time. She said she felt like she was living with a stranger, which was accurate. The man she'd married, the one who'd trusted her with his vulnerabilities, had been killed by her response to that trust. What remained was a more practical, self-contained version who no longer made the mistake of emotional dependency. Update 2. 6 months after her father's recovery, she started talking about divorce. She said our marriage felt dead, that I'd become cold and unresponsive. She wanted a partner who could share emotional intimacy, who could be present during difficult times. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but I didn't point it out directly. Instead, I asked if she was complaining about our relationship dynamic. I wondered aloud if she was being too soft, if she couldn't handle the pressures of marriage to someone who didn't provide constant emotional support. She realized what I was doing then, reflecting her own words and attitudes back at her. She accused me of being cruel, of deliberately withholding affection as revenge. I told her I wasn't withholding anything. I was simply giving her exactly what she'd indicated she wanted in a partner. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. I signed them without contest, without lawyers, without drama. She got to keep most of our shared belongings since I'd already mentally moved on from that life anyway. Update 3. 2 years post-divorce, I'm in a completely different place. The therapy I'd started during our marriage continued, and I learned to distinguish between healthy emotional sharing and codependency. I discovered that my anxiety wasn't a character flaw, but a signal that needed attention, not suppression. I'm seeing someone now, a woman who responded to my openness about mental health struggles with empathy and support. When I told her about my panic attacks, she asked what she could do to help during an episode. When I shared my fears about work pressure, she listened and offered perspective without judgment. It's strange how different relationships can be when built on actual compatibility rather than performance of what you think the other person wants. My ex-wife reached out recently through mutual friends, apparently wanting to reconnect and possibly reconcile. She'd been through some difficult times, job loss, health issues with her mother, and seemed to have gained perspective on emotional support and vulnerability. But I'm not interested in revisiting that dynamic. The person she'd dismissed and diminished no longer exists, and the person I've become learned valuable lessons from that relationship's failure. I discovered that I don't need to earn someone's love by hiding my struggles, and I won't waste time with people who view emotional honesty as weakness. Sometimes the most profound revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or deliberate cruelty. Sometimes it's simply becoming the person you needed to be all along, with people who appreciate that authentic version rather than demanding you perform strength you don't feel. She wanted a man who never complained, never showed weakness, never needed emotional support. She got exactly that, and discovered too late that such a person also doesn't offer the emotional connection that makes relationships meaningful. The joke was on both of us. but I was the one who learned to laugh about it. I don't hate her anymore. If anything, I'm grateful. Her rejection of my vulnerability forced me to develop genuine emotional resilience rather than the performance of strength I'd been maintaining for years. She taught me what I didn't want in a partner and, inadvertently, what I deserved instead. The man who'd sat in that kitchen, desperately seeking support from someone incapable of providing it, was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that true strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's the wisdom to share those struggles with people worthy of that trust.